Hello, hello. Come on in, take a seat. I hope you can hear me okay. Welcome, welcome, everyone. Hello, hello. Where are you guys from? Where are you today? I hope you can hear me okay. Morning from Sicily. Hi, Jane. Good morning. I'm down in Brighton in England. And it's a bit of a gloomy day here, actually. Morning from gloomy Krakow. Okay, morning from Venice, Italy, morning from Germany, morning from Belgium. Warsaw, cloudy South End, Cologne. Yeah, cloudy here in Brighton too. Sun in Newcastle. Well, you're lucky, Lynn. You're very lucky. All right. Okay, cool. I'm going to sort of close the chat for now, just to not be super distracted. If you've got specific questions, obviously just put them in the Q&A and we can come back to them at the end of the talk. Newcastle, Bath, very sunny. Wow, you're so lucky with all this sun. It's definitely gloomy in Brighton. Okay, so let's get started. Welcome. Really happy to see you here. I'm Anna-Lee. I am a Swedish teacher, a course creator, and an author. And I've been teaching adults online, been teaching them Swedish for about 15 years. And today I wanted to talk about something I've been thinking about, and I've been exploring this for a long time. Because I think as language teachers, we encounter our students' emotional dramas and personal struggles. And even though, I mean, we're not psychologists, we're not therapists, but we do encounter it. And it is difficult, I think, to, teach verb conjugations or word order in subclauses if our student really lacks the motivation, or they are just riddled with, I don't know, sense of, I can't do this, they lack self-confidence, or maybe they just struggle to keep to a routine. So we might feel that, well, I know what you need to do to improve, but there's sort of barriers in the way. So in this talk, I wanted to share some perspectives that I've found useful. And it's a bit of a light-hearted take today. It's a light-hearted take on personal development and psychology, coming from my experience of teaching adults. Okay, so I'm going to get into my presentation here. So we've got some visual aids. So students are, of course, all individuals. They have their own backgrounds, they have their own habits, strengths, weaknesses, challenges, and history and cultural influences and all those sorts of things. So when you meet and teach your students, you will encounter, or at least get a sense of, the voices in their heads, because we all have voices in our heads. We could call them voices, or we could call them attitudes, archetypes maybe, or characters, but we all have them. And before looking at the different student characters and what their typical behaviors are and what their struggles and needs might be, first let me briefly go through the sort of archetype voices or characters that we all have. And this is inspired by the 6 characters of drama from the book Mindworks. So we're going to go through the 6 characters of drama here, a bit of a light-hearted take on them. So the first character in our heads is the judge. And it's one of the big characters in many of our heads. And the judge is always comparing. So we are either worse than or better than, or something that we do is worse than or better than. And the judge compares us to sort of a standard that we've made up in our imagination. So if a student's judge tells them that they are worse than, they might believe that they're not good enough and what they have done doesn't measure up. And they can end up being very hard on themselves for not understanding something or not being able to do something. And the judge tells them that they should know better or maybe be better by now. And this can be really quite demoralizing. It might also compare them to, for example, native speakers, which I think is quite unfair. If the judge tells them that they are better than, then it can inflate their ego and tell them that they are really quite good, when actually maybe they need to work on a few things to improve. And this can lead to them maybe taking a course that's too high for their level, for example, or maybe not pay attention to when a teacher tells them what they need to do to improve. Right, character number 2, the victim. The victim often goes hand in hand with the judge. The victim receives a judgment from the judge and agrees with it. So it's a bit like you have a voice talking in your head saying like, oh, I didn't remember this, but what is implied is I should have remembered this. And then the victim comes in and confirms it and says, yeah, I didn't remember that, I failed. The victim attitude is one of hopelessness and powerlessness. And the victim is also characterized by a lot of blame. One of the primary emotions that you'll find with victimhood is fear. It's fear of not knowing, not being in control, not being safe. So a victim attitude may lead a student to be fearful and try to avoid the feeling of not knowing or not being in control. And I mean, obviously, as we all know, when we're learning something new, it's impossible to avoid the feeling of not knowing. It comes as a parcel of the process. But the victim character may feel very uncomfortable in this situation, and it may trigger uncomfortable emotions and memories, maybe from their school years when they felt out of control or when they didn't know something. Character number 3, the villain. All good dramas need a villain. So this character can take a couple of different forms. It can be in the shape of a rebel, sort of don't tell me what to do type attitude. But it can also be in the shape of a saboteur. And this side of the villain has a tendency to sabotage their own well-being. The saboteur character can, for example, be prepared to throw away a whole relationship just because of a minor incident. But it can also damage and destroy by neglect. It can talk a student into not doing the things that they need to do, so they procrastinate and let things slip. And I feel like the saboteur character is one that's very common in language learning. The whole thing of procrastinating, postponing, not keeping up a study routine, not doing the homework. And finally, might tell the student that there's no point in continuing. And then maybe the judge in their head tells them that they've failed they're not good enough, and then the victim agrees. So then maybe they stop studying altogether. So you can kind of see, it's kind of easy to see when you play around with these characters that you can kind of see how they work together and sort of collude, and they can really make a language learning journey difficult. Character number 4. The hero. The hero character is one that wants to help others, but they can also be driven by a deep need for admiration, maybe praise and attention. They want to prove themselves worthy. They perform and the crowds cheer and they receive attention. They receive praise and they get noticed. So when learning a language, I think the hero character could be behind sort of frantic studying to get the best grades or the best test results. And the motivation of somebody who has a strong hero character could be based on external aspects, what people around them think about them. So even though, of course, external motivation can be useful, right? It can be useful in certain circumstances. It can be good if you need to study for a test or you have a particular goal and you have a deadline. But it can lead to a situation where someone is learning even though they aren't actually enjoying it. So it's much better, I think, in the long run, of course, to nurture students' internal motivation, because that's enjoyment. It's the satisfaction of making progress. It's enjoying the learning journey. It's feeling curious and open and kind of being in that flow state, feeling satisfied when understanding something difficult. Character number 5, the entitled. The main attitude here is, of course, entitlement. The entitled character feels that they deserve, they are owed something. Criteria are expected to be met and standards upheld. Entitled characters, they can take things for granted. They can also feel actually quite puzzled, or they might even get angry when they don't receive what they think they're entitled to. Learning a new language can be difficult for the entitled because they can feel that they are entitled to results and achievements, but they may not realize that they have to actually put the hard work in for themselves. They may feel like, I'm taking part in a language course, then the results should just materialize because they paid for it, right? Next character, the last one, character number 6, the self-sacrificer. So this character sacrifices their well-being and emotional happiness for a very small gain. A self-sacrificer can be a workaholic who works so hard that they sacrifice their friendships, their family life, their kind of emotional well-being or physical well-being, perhaps. They can sacrifice their own well-being to please someone else and get their approval. And a self-sacrificer, that type of character can lead a student to study frantically as well, study really hard, a bit like the hero. Perhaps they're trying to please someone in particular, could be the parents, could be a partner, could be the boss. So they may study, verb forms until their eyes bleed, almost as if it were a punishment. So now that you've got a sense of how these characters might operate, at least on a surface level, let me introduce you to the 7 student characters that I regularly meet when I work as a language teacher. And like I said, this is a light-hearted take on different attitudes among students. And these are not the only ones. And there are definitely combinations of them too. But these are some of the most common characters that I meet pretty much every week as a language teacher. So let's have a look at them. The first one, the diligent student. The diligent student is, on the surface, a model student. They take careful notes, they do what they're told, they always submit their homework on time, and they will leave the lesson structure up to you to decide because you're the expert, you're the teacher, and they obediently trust your assessments. But I think when you scratch the surface here, they may have a hero character or maybe a self-sacrificer character. So this means that the challenge for them and for you as a teacher will be the motivation levels, because they are likely to be external. And if their external motivation plunges, then they're going to find it hard to keep going. So therefore, what we need to do is to try and stimulate their internal motivation. And we can do this by, of course, things like exploring their personal interests, making them feel like they're in control of their language journey, and encourage them to kind of set out their plans and set out their goals. So really tap into the internal motivation for a diligent student. Character number 2, the grammar nerd. The grammar nerd loves grammar. The more complicated, the better. They thrive on discussing intricate details of grammar, and they want to go deep into all the exceptions and maybe even etymology. A grammar nerd might enjoy spending hours and hours talking about the language, but feel very out of depth when it comes to practical application, like speaking. I think that you shouldn't be surprised if there's a hero character somewhere inside a grammar nerd. I think they're likely to thrive on feeling intelligent and clever. But I think the thing here is we need to pay attention to whether we think that their motivation is external only or also internal. Because if the grammar nerd experiences truly internal motivation by feeling curious and feeling satisfied when they've learned something, then, well, we don't need to worry so much about the motivation levels. But if their motivation is mainly external, then we need to watch out in the same way as for the diligent student and help them to build up a stronger internal motivation level. And we also need to encourage them to use the language more rather than just talking about it. Character number 3, the nervous perfectionist. So this character can take many different forms. So a nervous perfectionist could be terrified of opening their mouth to speak because they are so worried about saying something incorrectly. They might beat themselves up regarding their pronunciation, their writing, their reading comprehension or listening skills, and they could minimize their achievements. You often hear this type of student saying, I'm not good enough, or I still can't do this. And they can get stuck in minute details of the language production, which means that they don't really achieve any sense of flow. I think when I meet a nervous perfectionist, sometimes I feel like the voices in their heads are so loud that I'm like, who am I talking to? As you probably already figured out, there's definitely a big judge character lurking here, and also a victim character. So therefore, the biggest challenge as a teacher of a nervous perfectionist is to challenge their inner judge. Before you've started to challenge their judge, it can be really quite difficult to make any kind of progress because they're just riddled with self-doubt. So having an open discussion about their fears and showing examples of maybe like typical language learning myths, that will help them to start distancing themselves a bit from their judge. And if you want, and I've done this several times, you can actually even talk about the judge character and explain, what they might sound like, what kind of voices they might, what the things that they might say, and why they're not helpful when learning a language. You can also ask them, if you want, to name their judge. I mean, it's just for fun. You can give them a name, and then if they do, then you can playfully call them out when you hear that their inner judge is talking. I'm going to give you an example of this because you can actually do this with any of the characters. And I'm going to share a story about one of my clients a little bit later on. Next student character is the clock in, clock out. So the clock in, clock out character is someone who pays for their lessons, but they do very little else in between lessons. They won't do any homework and they won't take any personal responsibility for their learning. They might have many excuses. It might be work has been crazy, family matters, I slept poorly, I didn't have time. And they could also have an attitude of expecting progress as a direct result of having paid for time with you or having paid for a course. It's transactional for them. It's almost like they expect the knowledge to be somehow imported and installed into their brains just by sitting with you or being in front of you. You might feel like you're child minding during the lessons. And I think there can certainly be an element of the entitled character here. Could be a sense of entitlement that has created this transactional perspective on learning. The clock in, clock out student may be used to solving problems by just throwing money at it. It could also be that they have a saboteur that encourages procrastination. In my experience, it could also be due to a complete lack of knowledge about how learning actually works. It could be that they just haven't realized that they're the ones that need to do the majority of the work when it comes to learning a language. And you just can't install a piece of software into their brain. So therefore, your focus could be to teach them how to learn before teaching them the language itself. So you can help them build study routines, you can give them tools, trackers and planners and checklists, and talk about planning their weekly studying routine outside of the lessons. Because I think if you don't do this, if you don't help them realize this, they can become disappointed in the lack of progress over time. And a typical comment along these lines could sound like, I don't feel I've progressed, even though I've been having lessons with you for X months or X years. And I think what they fail to realize is that perhaps they've only had, let's say that they've had like 10 lessons with you over, 2 months. And they've done no practice themselves in between the lessons. So essentially they've had less than what, 2 days worth of an intensive course, but they choose to measure that in months, which sounds like slow progress. So I think as language teachers, this is definitely something that we want to avoid, because I think it can damage our reputation and lead to negative reviews. So the way to do this is to really hammer home the fact that you measure time, the sort of language learning time, in hours spent studying, which is a combination of lesson hours and homework hours, and not in calendar weeks or calendar months or calendar years. Because, I mean, 6 months, what does that mean? Could be 10 hours, could be 650 hours, which is a huge difference. So this will help the clock in, clock out student to create a more realistic view of their language learning process and to take more personal responsibility, and it will avoid them being disappointed by any lack of progress due to their own lack of priorities. Next character, number 5, the happy but sloppy speaker. The happy but sloppy speaker, this is a fun character who loves to hear their own voice. They are enthusiastic, they're unafraid, they're enjoyable to spend time with, but they want to run before they can walk. And they have no time for grammar structure or boring rules. Grammar is uninspiring. They just want to talk. Because of this attitude, they have adopted many bad habits, and you may often hear their mother tongue coming through in their speech, like small filler words. Well, but, so, like, those kinds of words. And they're unlikely to even notice this because they're just so enthusiastic and they're so much fun that few people correct their speech. So you can think of this type of student character as the complete opposite of a nervous perfectionist. So this character behind, so again, when you scratch the surface, could be one or more of the characters of drama that we're dealing with in here. Could be the rebel, could be the saboteur, could be the entitled. So if we think of the rebel character, that might be behind this kind of perception of grammar. You know, they don't want to follow any rules. Or if they have a clear saboteur, it could be that the lack of attention to grammar and structure comes from procrastination. If they have an entitled character, it may say to them that they are above having to learn grammar. They don't need to, and they're justified in just having fun. So in order to get to the bottom of how to help this type of student to progress, I think we need to first start by figuring out which dominant character is behind this and then tackle that. Student character number 6. So usually in January, could be in September as well, but usually January, the resolution breaker books in a lesson with you. They can turn up at any point of the year, but most likely to start early in the year. They are very motivated. Oh my gosh, they are so pumped, and they will communicate intensively with you before they start. They will send you long emails about how excited they are to start this big language journey of theirs. And they will pay out money on a package straight away, and they will talk about, now I'm so focused on learning this language. And they may have tried to learn for a long time, on and off. Could be that they have a partner who's a native speaker, maybe. They will start out enthusiastically, but they are likely to cool off after a few months. So characters that could be found in here are the judge and the saboteur. It could be that they have a very strong judge that tells them that they should learn the language. They may feel they should learn it because of people around them, parents, partners, colleagues, friends, meaning that obviously the motivation will be mainly external. Their judge might also whisper in their ear that they are not good enough, so they could break down their confidence over time. And then obviously the victim character will come in because they'll be like, oh yeah, you're right. But they could also have a saboteur telling them that, you know, they could postpone and they can procrastinate and just leave things be for a bit. They might feel that it's too hard. They might not have a realistic idea of what it means to learn a language. So they start to skip homework, skip lessons, and then they lose the momentum and they give up. So it's important to stimulate their internal motivation here again, and also encourage them to set up realistic study routines that they can follow, which will sort of carry them through if their motivation starts to dip. So I mentioned earlier that I'm going to share a little personal story of one of my clients. So I wanted to share a little story of one of my current clients, and he is a classic resolution breaker. He's tried to learn many times. He has a partner who speaks the language, and he's started and he's all full of beans and enthusiasm. And then after like a month and a half, he sort of slips away, falls out of the routine. And then he comes back after 4 or 5 months and he's like, oh, now, work's been crazy, but now I'm back on it. And then it just goes on and on and on like this. So we've explored this and we've found that he has a real strong resistance to kind of self-studying and keeping this routine. And we found that he's got a really strong saboteur in him. And he tries to avoid this saboteur at all costs. He gets so uncomfortable when he feels this resistance. He hates it. And so as soon as he feels any level of resistance, he's off. He's doing something else to make him feel better. He's going to the pub, he's going out cycling, he's watching Netflix, you name it, he's off. He does not want to be near that resistance, which obviously means that when he feels that resistance, nothing gets done. So we explored the idea that he could maybe invite this uncomfortable feeling, invite the resistance. So I was kind of telling him that you can see it as your resistance or your saboteur is kind of knocking on your door. And what you usually do is like, la, 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 I'm not opening the door. I didn't hear anything, or I'm going to do something else. And instead, welcome it in, kind of go, come on in. Oh, here you are, Mr. and Mrs. Saboteur. Come on in. Do you want a cup of tea? Sit down, have a seat, be the perfect host, and let them in, let them be there whilst you get on with your studying or whatever it is that you need to do. So, and he really liked this idea. He was like, I really like this. I've never thought of it this way before. And actually he admitted that he has the same problem with in many other areas of his life, so in work situations. So then I floated the idea that we could maybe name his character as well. I just said that sometimes it's good to name them because it makes it feel a little bit more, it's a bit more fun and it's a bit more personal. And straight away he was like, his name is Jeff. I can feel it. It's definitely a Jeff. And I was like, okay, great. But it was like no hesitation. Yeah, his name is Jeff. Okay, fine. Jeff it is. So after this lesson, when we've named his saboteur Jeff, my client immediately bought a new package of lessons and he booked them all of them in one go. He was like, da, 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 da. And I thought, okay, this is great. This is clearly like him applying what we've talked about. So I decided to just reply to his booking confirmation and kind of play with it a bit. And I just want to share our email conversation. So I sent an email to him and I said, send my love to Jeff, because I knew that Jeff was there. And he replied to me and he said, Jeff is over the moon. Thank you so much. We're already tackling task number 2 and I've offered him a Viennese swirl, which I thought was so lovely. And I said, oh, all he wanted was some tea and biscuits. So, so I think this shows that, you know, awareness of these characters can be really helpful for students, and also like using a bit of humor and having fun with it actually goes a really long way. You may have noticed, I don't know if you noticed, but in the beginning I said 7 student characters, but I only had pictures of 6. And I actually don't have a picture of this 7th student character. There's no way I can kind of stereotype them in that kind of fun way. So, but it is a student character that I call the creative and self-sufficient. So occasionally you will come across the creative and self-sufficient. And this is a student who has a beautiful balance between being creative, studious, self-motivated, meticulous, open, realistic, but also curious. And they will take responsibility for their own learning, but they will also listen to your advice. And when you teach them something, they will immediately try and incorporate it into the production of the language. And when you introduce something new, for example, I don't know, some new grammar rule, maybe, they will explore it further on their own after the lesson. They will try new things out. They will come to you for feedback, and they will explore new tools, seek out new resources, and they will balance the need for kind of thorough grammar knowledge with creative language production. They will not beat themselves up when they make mistakes, and they're not afraid to try new things. They will plan their own study routines, and they will make steady progress, and they will make sure they put necessary regular hours in to reach their milestone. And they actually don't seem to have any dominant character in their heads. So when you meet a creative and self-sufficient student, you will enjoy every second that you spend with them. So these are the 7 kind of student characters that I regularly meet. But of course, there are other influencing factors. Of course, there are. And I think it's worth mentioning some of these factors that can influence students' ability and capacity to learn. I mean, of course, like learning differences like dyslexia, or differences like ADHD, ADD, autism, as well as, of course, many types of, you know, mental health issues could impact a student's ability to do certain things. And I think sometimes adult students, they may not be aware that they have maybe some of these differences. And it's not our job, I think, as language teachers to diagnose them. But it can be good to be aware of these factors and how they can play a role in their learning journey. And I think it's useful to explore learning preferences with each student, even if they don't know their preferred learning mode. They may have never had to think about how they want to learn or how they best learn. It can be useful to just raise the awareness of the fact that there are many different ways of learning. So you can, excuse me, you can encourage the student to explore various learning strategies, because there's more than one way of learning. Final question. This is one that I maybe throw out to you. Do we give the students what they want or what they need? Well, I think we should help students to set some realistic goals so that they can feel a sense of progress as they're studying with us. And of course, what people need will depend on how they want to use the language. Someone who's studying to pass an exam in order to apply for education or for a job, they will of course require different things than someone who just wants to be able to write, to emails to a friend or to family. But it also depends on what character they are. So I've talked a lot about these types of characters today. I think as a language teacher, I think it is our job to recognize the characters, but also challenge them and inspire them, the students, because it can be easy to sometimes just give the students what they want. So for example, if you have a grammar nerd, it's easy to just like, hey, here's lots of interesting grammar. But I think if we gently challenge them, I think their journey will be more rewarding. And it'll be more rewarding for us too. And I think by recognizing their comfort zones and their characters, we can help guide the students towards expanding the knowledge a bit, pushing out those boundaries a bit, and maybe moving outside of the comfort zones so they can achieve, their language goals and even maybe experience something that they didn't expect. So I think if you do this, they will become your biggest fans. Thank you. That was the end of my presentation. So I'm going to come out of this and I'm going to come back to you, and I hope that I'll be happy to stick around and maybe discuss this, all these characters, and I don't know, maybe you can tell me if any of this resonates with you, if you've experienced any of these characters. Let me come back to you. Right, okay. I'm just going to go into the Q&As and read some of the questions there. Kieran, I recognize myself in several characters, not just one. How do I separate this out? Finally, is this a comprehensive list? Okay. I don't think this is a comprehensive list, but it is a list that's kind of, look, this is a simplified kind of way of looking at it. Of course, people are more, we're all complicated and there's a lot of overlaps and stuff, but I think the thing to say, I don't know, Kieran, if you mean the 6 characters of drama or the student characters, but I think the 6 characters of drama, the thing to say there is we have them all. Like, it's not just like, oh, I only have the judge, but I don't have the, we all, this is like our cast in the drama of our life. And I mean drama as in like a stage play on stage. We have them all. We all have a judge, we all have a victim, we all have a self-sacrificer, we have them all. It's just that sometimes I think certain characters can be a bit more dominating than the others. And I think in certain situations, one character may come to the, I don't know, the edge of the stage or dominate the room a bit more. If we're experiencing certain things, then certain characters kind of take over. So I think we have them all, and the dynamics between them can change. And I think the idea here is we can't get rid of them. We're with them for life. Like this is who we are. But I think what's helpful for anyone, student or teacher, anyone, is to just recognize who's talking, right? And maybe we can become observers of the stage play sometimes, instead of kind of thinking that it's us, if that makes sense. This becomes a bit philosophical, I suppose, but you know, you can recognize, oh, this is like, I'm really beating myself up now. This is my judge. Like, oh, my judge is loud today. You know, and that's fine. We can't, the goal is not to eliminate them. The goal is never to eliminate them, but it's a big difference between thinking, I'm rubbish, like I'm worse than everyone else, I'm not good enough, and believing in that, versus kind of having a bit of distance and going, oh, my judge is is talking a lot today. All right, okay, what is it saying? And just because your judge, for example, is talking, that's okay. They can talk, give them a cup of tea, whatever, you know, but it doesn't mean that you have to act on it. It doesn't mean that you have to believe what they're saying. They're just on stage chatting. I hope this makes sense. Okay. Jennifer, would you advise explicitly showing pupils the types of learners, getting them to label themselves to promote a better understanding of their internal motivations, or would this have a detrimental effect? Great question. My concern is that some students could misidentify, a bit like people who discover the yeah, I don't know. I suppose you used the word pupils. I don't know if you meant children or young people, perhaps. I think, I mean, yeah, this is a tough one. This is a really tough one. I sometimes apply the kind of background of this with adult learners without saying what it is. I kind of talk about, I don't necessarily show them a picture of a judge or a grammar nerd and say, oh, you're such a grammar nerd. But, you know, I kind of discuss around it a bit and kind of touch on it without sort of giving them a test and see which one do you score highly on. So I think, whereas actually with the guy that I was telling you about, whose saboteur is now called Jeff, I have shown him, actually I showed him this presentation because I wanted to ask if it was okay that I included his email responses. So I suppose it has to be a judgment call in a way. You have to kind of see if you think that's appropriate. Yeah, I would maybe be a little bit careful, but you can still apply all of it by you kind of knowing about it, so you can still kind of touch on it and sort of gently encourage them. And I think like a grammar nerd, for example, I mean, there's nothing wrong with kind of saying like, hey, you are so good at grammar and you really clearly enjoy this, which is amazing, and that's so good because it's so important. But shall we, one thing that we may work on a little bit more, and I know this might be uncomfortable for you, but we need to like do some gentle improvisation and let's just talk a bit more. So kind of like nudging them a bit, I think I find is helpful. How do you inform a student that doesn't recognize that they have dyslexia? Oh, that's such a good question. Oh, that's such a good question, because I have been in that situation before. Yeah, that's very difficult. I actually don't really have a good answer to that. I have somebody at the moment that I'm suspecting that he's got a little bit of dyslexia, but I'm not sure. And I'm not an expert on dyslexia myself, so I feel like I'm not, yeah, it's very difficult because like I said, we as language teachers, it's not our job to diagnose them. But on the other hand, if you notice something that is coming up and that, I don't know, yeah, you have to tread very carefully, and if you feel like the relationship with that student is, you know, is that they trust you, and you could maybe phrase it in a very gentle way, like, I want, or you can maybe like tell them a story about someone else without even saying, I think this is you. You can maybe just like go, oh, it was so interesting. I had somebody who just realized that they were a bit dyslexic, and it was really interesting. I don't know. But yeah, it's a very, very difficult one. Unless you are a bit more of an expert on dyslexia, then of course you can talk with more authority on that. Oh, Andrea, maybe they don't need to know as long as they learn. Yeah. Stigma, long waiting time for testing. As long as the learning you provide matches their needs as far as you see fit. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, we're getting into the area of like diagnoses, and it's a tricky one. It's a very tricky one, I think. The talk would make a very lovely article in a language magazine. Well, thank you. Perhaps you've not perhaps already written it up. It's actually a part in my book. It's actually a part in my book already. So I published a book last year, which is called The Language Teacher Rebel, which is a guide to building a teaching business online. So it's already published there, but thank you. I shall have a think about maybe I can rewrite it somehow. Yeah, that's a lovely idea. Thank you. Suzanne, I've had a few clock in, clock out characters. Yep. And I felt guilty, and that is a reflection, and that it is a reflection on my own teaching when they don't achieve what they want to achieve. Yes, I totally empathize with feeling like that. Absolutely, you do as a teacher. And I think this is, I suppose one of the things that I wanted to share here is a perspective on this, which might help us teachers to not, or it's always so easy when, when a student drops out and you just think, oh, I wasn't good enough. Then that's like our judge coming, right? Then we're like, oh, I wasn't good enough. I didn't do a good enough job. And then we're going to victimhood and we're like, oh, we've failed. So I guess, the students, they have all sorts of dramas on their own, and it's not necessarily because we did anything wrong as teachers. I mean, sometimes people might just drop off because, maybe the chemistry between the two of you didn't work out, and that's okay too. That's totally okay. But I think the clock in, clock outs, yeah, that is kind of what they do. They disappear. And I don't think it's anything to do with, in my experience, because I've had many of them as well, and they always come in January and they're gone by April. so and then maybe they come back next January. I mean, seriously, it could just be on repeat. So it's about, as language teachers, I think it's about realizing that it's not all about us. We can provide things, we can do things, but ultimately, especially with students that have an unrealistic view of what it takes to learn language, it is tough. But I think one of the things that I do, and I try to do a lot, and I try to incorporate it into my website, into all ways of, like, when they sign up, is to really try and hammer home this, like, we measure it in hours, not in weeks and months and years. And so, for example, when people come as a new student to me, I have like an intake form, and they just, a few questions like, have you studied the language before? Like, what, have you, like, what's your level? That kind of stuff. And then I always put in that, like, how many hours outside of the lessons can you do? How many hours can you put aside for like self-studying? Just to raise that. And then in any communication, I try and kind of incorporate this as well. So it's like finding ways to, I don't know, really be clear that this is not something that they just come in, sit the hour, off they go, and then that's it. So, yeah, I think it's about trying to incorporate that message and that viewpoint everywhere on your website, in blog posts or in intake forms, and try and hammer that home. Okay, sorry, I see things bubbling up on the chat as well. I'm just going to go into that. Okay. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you guys so much. Yeah, someone is saying, I found this really helpful in how I perceive my students in the classroom and how I might react to them in the future. Great. Yeah, the actual characters, rather than actual characters, the patterns you're describing are traits. Yeah, it could be another way of phrasing it. Yeah. Have enjoyed lots of chuckles. Yeah, I mean, I hope you take this the right way, because of course some of these things are quite serious in a way, and I don't mean to kind of belittle, you know, people's traits, and this is obviously a lot of stereotyping and funny pictures, and but I just wanted to kind of do it from a light-hearted point of view and having a bit of fun with it. But of course, like, people are complicated, and you know, we're all individuals, and this is just a little bit of fun, but I think there's a bit of truth in it still. So kind of take it as a light-hearted take on personal development and psychology. Yeah, Lorenzo, you cannot possibly please all of your customers all of the time. Yeah, so right. Some people are unpleasable. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And some people, you know, they might come to you for lessons and then they leave and you're quite happy about it. And that's also okay. Like, it's fine. You can't get on with everyone. You can't please everyone. And, you know, you might have a style of teaching that really appeals to some people, and some other teacher might teach in a different way that appeals to others. And that's fine. That's absolutely fine. Great. Okay. Well, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this. I find this so interesting. I mean, to talk about this topic, it's super interesting, and I think it's just that thing when you have like a nervous perfectionist and you're like, well, I can tell you loads of things that you could be doing, but I can see that we're not going to get anywhere until we address this elephant in the room, you know? So it's just finding ways to do that, or ways to look at that situation. Because I think years ago, I think I was like, well, you do this verbs here, and we do this course book here, and we just process. And it's like, well, you know, it's not gonna happen if this person is just like, I feel so rubbish and I can never do anything right. And it's kind of tricky. So yeah, being aware of this, I think, is useful. Okay, thank you. I think I'm going to wrap up. Thank you so much. If you want to stay in touch, then I am on Instagram. I gave a talk on Instagram yesterday, so you may have seen that or maybe not, but I'm very much on Instagram at Swedish Made Easy or at Language Teacher Rebels. I'm also having a talk later today, which I highly recommend, where I'm going to talk to my other course creator who's an opera singer. And we've created a course on Swedish pronunciation together, which is a really interesting collaboration, and where we've actually used MRI scans to really see what's going on in here. So we're going to share a bit of, you know, our story of building that course and how we've created it and so on. That's at 3:30 UK time. So yeah, hopefully see you there. And if not, have a great rest of your Sunday. And yeah, hopefully see you soon. And thank you so much for coming. All right. Take care. Bye-bye.